The 1980s were full of motorcycles that didn't make sense at the time. Back then, most riders wanted fast, loud, and simple. A few manufacturers ignored that and built bikes around racing logic instead. Those bikes didn't sell well. Some dealers couldn't even give them away. Now, everyone calls them legends and pretends they always knew. They didn't. If these bikes came out today, nobody would call them strange. They'd call them advanced. We're counting down 10 forgotten machines that were ahead of their time. Drop a comment if you've ridden any of these, or if we missed one. First on the list, Yamaha FZ750 Genesis. Before the FZ750, most manufacturers were treating engines and frames like separate problems. You'd design a motor, then figure out where to stuff it in a chassis. That's how everyone did it through the early 80s. Yamaha looked at that approach and decided it was backwards. With the FZ750, they designed the bike as one complete system, and that kind of thinking was years ahead of where the rest of the industry actually stood. The Genesis engine became the world's first production inline-four with 5 valves per cylinder, 3 intake valves, 2 exhaust. That alone was radical for 1985, but the valve count wasn't the real innovation. What mattered was how they tilted the entire engine forward in the frame. By leaning the cylinders at a sharp angle, they dropped the center of gravity and centralized mass in ways most other manufacturers wouldn't adopt until the 90s. The forward inclined layout allowed a shorter intake path, tighter packaging, and weight distribution that fundamentally changed how the bike behaved in corners. On paper, the FZ750 didn't chase headline numbers. It wasn't trying to dominate spec sheets with raw horsepower. What it did was solve problems most riders didn't even know existed yet. Yamaha developed the frame and engine together instead of bolting them together after the fact, which sounds obvious now, but was borderline revolutionary in the mid-80s. That integrated approach meant the bike felt balanced in ways contemporary machines couldn't match. Riders who spent real time on the FZ750 noticed something unusual about mid-corner behavior. The bike didn't fight you when you were leaned over and on the gas. It tracked cleanly through turns with a predictability that made confident riding easier, not because of magic suspension or sticky tires, but because of deliberate engineering decisions about mass placement and structural integration. That composure came from design choices made before the first prototype was even built. Nearly every FZR and R series bike that followed borrowed concepts directly from this machine. Modern sport bike packaging with compact engines, forward mass bias, and chassis first thinking all trace back to the FZ750. It never became a poster bike because it wasn't flashy. It quietly laid the foundation for what superbikes would eventually become, and by the time everyone else figured out what had happened, the FZ750 was already old news, replaced by flashier bikes that built on its innovations without acknowledging where those ideas originated. Second, Kawasaki GPZ-900R Ninja. The GPZ-900R represented a complete reset for Kawasaki. This wasn't an evolution of something they'd already made, or a refinement of an existing platform. It was a clean sheet project built from scratch, which mattered in 1984 when most manufacturers were still iterating on air-cooled designs carried over from the 70s. Kawasaki built the Ninja around a 908cc inline-four with liquid cooling, dual overhead cams, and 4 valves per cylinder. That combination represented a major leap when most high-performance bikes were still running air-cooled engines that overheated under sustained hard use. The compact engine design allowed tighter packaging, and positioning it lower and further forward than earlier Kawasaki designs improved high-speed stability in ways that became obvious once you actually rode the thing at triple-digit speeds. The full fairing wasn't cosmetic coverage. It was engineered for sustained top-speed performance, which mattered because the GPZ-900R sat among the fastest production motorcycles of its era. What separated it from earlier fast bikes was how Kawasaki proved that outright speed could coexist with durability and everyday usability. Plenty of quick bikes from the early 80s were fragile or unreliable when pushed hard repeatedly. The Ninja changed that expectation entirely. Riders coming from older Kawasaki sport bikes noticed the difference immediately. Earlier machines had speed but often felt crude or unrefined at the limit. The GPZ-900R felt composed. High-speed sweepers didn't unsettle it. Long highway runs didn't cook the engine. The bike was genuinely fast, but it was also something you could use without constantly worrying about mechanical drama or thermal meltdowns. The bike also proved itself in production-based racing, reinforcing its credibility beyond street performance. What made it ahead of its time was how completely it unified liquid cooling, multi-valve technology, compact packaging, and aerodynamic bodywork into one cohesive platform before that approach became standard across the industry. Most people remember the GPZ-900R from Top Gun, but the real story is how it redefined modern sport bike expectations before competitors caught up. Coming in third, Suzuki GSX-R750. The original GSX-R750 wasn't a sport-oriented street bike with some racing DNA mixed in. It was a race replica built for public sale, which represented a completely different philosophy than what most manufacturers pursued in the early 80s. Where other bikes tried to balance performance with comfort or touring capability, Suzuki built the GSX-R with one singular focus. They used their advanced cooling system, combining oil cooling with airflow to manage heat while keeping weight down compared to full liquid cooling setups. The inline-four ran dual overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, and tuning optimized for high RPM operation and endurance racing durability. The frame came in lightweight, the bodywork stayed minimal, and the whole package weighed significantly less than anything competing in the same category. Suzuki wasn't aiming for long-distance comfort or practical everyday use. They built this thing to be aggressive, responsive, and ready for track adaptation with minimal modification required. Everything about the GSX-R750 prioritized track performance over street refinement. The ergonomics positioned riders aggressively forward. The gearing kept the engine in its power band during hard riding. Component selection favored competition-grade suspension and brakes over softer street-oriented setups. Most manufacturers in 1985 were still building bikes that tried pleasing everyone. Comfortable enough for touring, sporty enough for weekend rides, practical enough for commuting. The GSX-R750 ignored all of that and focused exclusively on going fast. Riders who bought the original GSX-R figured out quickly what they'd signed up for. The bike was uncomfortable. The riding position cramped most people. The suspension transmitted every road imperfection directly into the rider. None of that mattered once you started riding it hard, because the bike came alive in ways that softer, more compromised sport bikes couldn't approach. It demanded commitment and rewarded aggression in ways that felt genuinely different from everything else available. What made it ahead of its time was the completeness of that commitment. Suzuki didn't hedge their bets or attempt making it comfortable for casual riders. They built a race bike you could legally ride on the street, and that philosophy became the blueprint for superbikes throughout the late 80s and 90s. The GSX-R750 established a formula the entire industry eventually copied. Lightweight, stiff chassis, high-revving engine, race-ready suspension, and zero apologies for being uncomfortable or impractical. That mindset defined an entire generation of sport bikes and changed what riders expected from performance machines. Fourth, Suzuki GSX-R750R Limited Edition. By the mid-80s, Suzuki realized the standard GSX-R750 had fundamentally changed the sport bike landscape. But racing was evolving faster than the street model could keep pace with. The limited edition wasn't a refresh or an upgrade package. It was an escalation. Built to meet homologation requirements for international endurance and superbike racing, the GSX-R750R was never designed to blend into normal ownership. Suzuki treated it as a customer-accessible race platform, and the most obvious signal came from the dry clutch. From a rider's perspective, it announced itself immediately. Noisy at idle, abrupt at low speeds, and completely uninterested in smooth city riding. That wasn't a flaw or an oversight. It was a direct consequence of racing priorities, taking precedence over street manners. Once moving, the intent became clear. The close-ratio gearbox kept the engine in a narrow, high RPM band that demanded commitment from the rider. Short shifting dulled the bike completely. Aggressive throttle use transformed it into something genuinely different. Riders learned quickly that this machine rewarded a specific approach and punished hesitation. The suspension was firm even by contemporary standards, transmitting road texture directly through the chassis. On smooth tarmac or proper track surfaces, that stiffness translated into confidence and precision during aggressive riding. Suzuki didn't soften the experience for public buyers. This was a bike that expected mechanical sympathy and riding discipline from its owner. People who owned them often described the limited edition as tiring on the street, but deeply rewarding when ridden with purpose and intent. That description perfectly aligned with its racing DNA and homologation mission. Produced in limited numbers to satisfy endurance and superbike regulations, the GSX-R750R was among the earliest Japanese motorcycles to deliver near race-spec hardware directly to private owners willing to accept the compromises that came with it. Next up, Honda VFR 750R, or what was called RC30. Honda approached the RC30 from an entirely different angle than most manufacturers building homologation bikes. This wasn't a modified street bike turned into a racer. It was a race machine adapted just enough to be road legal. And everything about it reflected that world superbike homologation role. The gear-driven CAM V4 engine prioritized precision and durability over manufacturing ease or cost efficiency. The single-sided swing arm existed for rapid rear-wheel changes during endurance racing, not for visual drama or styling points. Build quality was extraordinary throughout, with hand-finished components and materials chosen for consistency under stress rather than comfort or ease of service. Honda built the RC30 in limited numbers dictated by racing regulations, not market demand. From the rider's seat, the RC30 felt serious in ways that were difficult to articulate but immediately apparent. Power delivery was smooth and progressive, almost deceptive in how it built speed. There was no sudden rush or dramatic surge. Speed accumulated cleanly and steadily, encouraging momentum and corner speed rather than brute force acceleration out of turns. Riders coming from inline-fours often found it demanding at first, requiring trust in the chassis and commitment to higher cornering speeds than they were accustomed to carrying. Where the RC30 truly excelled was stability. Mid-corner composure remained exceptional even when pushed hard into aggressive lean angles. The trade-off for that stability was effort. Steering inputs required intent and physical commitment. Casual riding could feel stiff or unrewarding, almost punishing riders who weren't fully engaged. Owners consistently remarked that the bike only made sense when ridden fast. At everyday speeds, its purpose felt muted or even obscured. Push it hard, and everything clicked into place. Engineered explicitly around world superbike regulations with minimal compromise for road comfort or accessibility, the RC30 established the homologation superbike formula that defined the category limited production numbers, race-first design philosophy, and engineering priorities that served competition requirements above all else. Sixth on the list, Yamaha FZR750R, or what was called OW01. If the RC30 was Honda's statement of dominance in late 80s superbike racing, the OW01 was Yamaha's response. And it was every bit as serious, uncompromising, and focused on winning at the highest level of competition. Yamaha conceived the OW01 with a singular goal: build a motorcycle capable of winning under evolving world superbike regulations. This wasn't an evolution of an existing street model or a street bike with race parts added. It was a purpose-built homologation machine, loosely adapted for public sale to satisfy production minimums. The bike used a highly developed version of the 5-valve Genesis engine, tuned specifically for top-end performance and sustained high-speed operation. The chassis was engineered around rigidity and precise handling under race conditions, prioritizing stability over everyday comfort or forgiving street manners. Components like suspension, brakes, and gearing all reflected track use first and road legality second. The bike was expensive, rare, and often misunderstood by riders expecting a typical Yamaha sport bike experience with approachable power and predictable handling. The OW01 delivered neither. It demanded skill, commitment, and understanding of what it was built to do. Unlike some homologation bikes that softened their edge slightly for public consumption or added creature comforts to justify the premium price, the OW01 remained unapologetically demanding. It required active engagement from the rider and punished laziness or imprecise inputs. The bike's legacy isn't measured in sales numbers or public recognition. It's measured in influence and competitive success. The OW01 informed the development of later R-Series machines and reinforced the idea that true performance bikes could be built around racing requirements first. even if that approach meant alienating casual buyers or limiting market appeal. Conceived as a direct response to late 80s superbike competition, the OW01 cemented Yamaha's commitment to homologation-driven development and influenced the design philosophy behind high-performance R-Series machines for years afterward. Coming in at number 7, Ducati 851. The air-cooled two-valve era was done. Ducati knew it, and the 851 was their answer. This wasn't an incremental update or a refreshed model with minor changes. It was a complete architectural reset. The moment Ducati committed to becoming a modern superbike manufacturer instead of clinging to heritage for its own sake. Under Massimo Bordi's technical leadership, the 851 introduced the Desmoquattro engine. Liquid-cooled, 90-degree V-twin, 4 valves per cylinder with desmodromic actuation. That alone would have been significant, but Ducati went further. They added electronic fuel injection through a Weber-Marelli system at a time when most Japanese competitors were still using carburetors. The choice wasn't about being trendy. It was about precision, consistency, and building an engine that could compete at the highest level of world superbike racing. The displacement wasn't arbitrary either. 851 cubic centimeters was chosen deliberately to exploit superbike regulations that allowed twins a capacity advantage over inline-fours. Combined with the steel trellis frame which balanced rigidity with feedback, the 851 felt fundamentally different from anything Ducati had built before. Weight distribution improved dramatically over air-cooled predecessors, and the cooling efficiency meant the engine could sustain high-speed operation without the thermal struggles that plagued earlier models. Riders who came from Japanese inline-fours often found the 851 demanding at first. The V-twin character required different throttle discipline and corner speed commitment, but once understood, the bike rewarded momentum and smooth inputs in ways that felt more connected than the clinical precision of contemporary four-cylinders. The 851 became the foundation for everything that followed. The 888, the 916, and Ducati's entire world superbike program traced directly back to this machine. It established the template: liquid cooling, 4-valve heads, fuel injection, and race-driven development. Before the 851, Ducati was a niche manufacturer with a romantic past. After it, they were a legitimate superbike contender with a blueprint for the future. 8th on the list, Kawasaki ZXR750. By the late 1980s, Japanese manufacturers were locked in an escalation that had nothing to do with comfort or practicality. Suzuki had the GSX-R, Yamaha had the FZR. Kawasaki's response was the ZXR750, and it made no apologies for what it was. This wasn't a sport bike softened for street use. The twin-spar aluminum perimeter frame prioritized rigidity and precision over compliance. Ergonomics were unapologetically race-focused. High rear sets, an aggressive reach to the bars, and a riding position that felt natural on a track but punishing in traffic. Kawasaki designed the ZXR around one assumption: the rider knew what they were doing and wanted a bike that rewarded commitment. The liquid-cooled inline-four delivered strong top-end performance, tuned for superbike racing rather than low-speed flexibility. Power built aggressively in the upper rev range, demanding that riders keep the engine spinning. Short shifting dulled the experience. Staying on the throttle and using the gearbox properly transformed it. The suspension was firm, transmitting feedback directly without filtering rough pavement. On smooth tarmac or track surfaces, that stiffness became confidence. On broken roads, it became exhausting. What set the ZXR apart wasn't just the specs, it was the intent. Kawasaki built this bike for riders who understood that track performance required compromise everywhere else. The braking system could handle repeated high-speed stops without fade. The chassis remained stable under hard braking and mid-corner load, but casual riding felt stiff and unforgiving, and the bike never pretended otherwise. The ZXR750 didn't achieve the iconic status of the GSX-R or the sales success of the FZR, but it influenced Kawasaki's thinking for years. The later ZX series development leaned heavily on the lessons learned here. Chassis rigidity matters, geometry dictates behavior, and some buyers will accept discomfort if the performance justifies it. The ZXR helped normalize the idea that street bikes could be built primarily around track priorities, even if that meant alienating riders who wanted versatility. Number 9. Suzuki RG500 Gamma. This was as close as most riders would ever get to Grand Prix racing from a dealership floor, not inspired by GP bikes, derived from them. The RG500 used a square-4 two-stroke engine, a layout pulled directly from Suzuki's racing experience. Compact, lightweight, and capable of producing power that seemed impossible given the displacement. The aluminum frame supported the engine in a package that weighed dramatically less than any four-stroke superbike of the era. The power-to-weight ratio was something four-stroke manufacturers wouldn't match for another decade, and even then, it required significantly larger displacement and far more complex engineering to get there. Two-stroke power delivery was abrupt. There was no gradual buildup or predictable torque curve. The engine either felt flat or erupted with violent urgency, depending entirely on where it sat in the rev range. Riders learned quickly that smooth throttle control mattered more than raw courage. The bike rewarded those who understood how to keep it in the power band and punished those who didn't. Maintenance was constant and demanding. The engine consumed oil at rates that shocked riders coming from four strokes, and spark plugs needed attention far more frequently than anyone expected. Mechanical sympathy wasn't optional. This wasn't a motorcycle for casual riders or those expecting four-stroke reliability. It demanded hands-on involvement and a tolerance for frequent servicing. For riders willing to accept that reality, the RG500 offered an experience no production four-stroke could replicate. What made the Gamma ahead of its time was the performance ceiling it demonstrated. The weight, the power delivery, the handling precision, all of it pointed toward where superbikes would eventually go, even if the technology itself was doomed. Four-stroke manufacturers spent the next 15 years chasing the power-to-weight ratios the RG500 achieved in 1985. When modern leader bikes finally matched those numbers, they did it with twice the displacement, liquid cooling, fuel injection, and electronics packages that added complexity the Gamma never needed. The RG500 represented the final era when two-stroke technology could be sold as a high-performance street machine. Environmental regulations and emissions standards were already tightening, and within a few years, bikes like this would become impossible to produce legally. That makes it a historical endpoint, but also a preview. It showed where performance was headed before regulations forced everyone to take a longer, more complicated route to get there. The technology died, but the benchmark it set influenced every superbike that followed. Rounding out the list, Bimota YB4. Bimota's philosophy was straightforward. Take a proven Japanese superbike engine and build a chassis around it that embarrasses everything the major manufacturers were producing. The YB4 was that idea executed at its highest level. The foundation was a Yamaha inline-four, selected for reliability and strong high RPM performance. Bimota's contribution wasn't the engine, it was everything surrounding it. The twin-spar aluminum frame was engineered with race-oriented stiffness targets, designed to eliminate flex and maximize feedback. The design process focused obsessively on weight distribution and steering precision, with the frame's geometry and structural elements calculated to optimize both. The engine wasn't just installed in the chassis. It functioned as a structural component integrated into the frame's load paths. Suspension and braking components were competition grade. Adjustability, tuning range, and component quality exceeded anything found on mass production sport bikes. The cost reflected that. The YB4 was expensive, exclusive, and built in limited numbers for riders who valued chassis sophistication over brand recognition. From the rider's seat, the difference was immediate. Steering response felt direct and communicative without being twitchy. High-speed stability was exceptional, a product of rigidity and geometry working together. Mid-corner feedback was precise, allowing riders to adjust lines with confidence. The trade-off was effort. This wasn't a forgiving motorcycle. It rewarded skill and punished mistakes, and casual riding could feel overly stiff or demanding. What made the YB4 ahead of its time was its core philosophy. Bimota demonstrated that chassis sophistication and component specification could be a primary differentiator, not just horsepower. They proved that boutique manufacturers could build motorcycles that outperformed mass-market bikes through engineering focus and material quality. That thinking wouldn't become widespread in production superbikes until years later, When manufacturers like Ducati, Aprilia, and BMW adopted similar chassis-first development strategies, the YB4 wasn't built for everyone. It was built for riders who understood that precision, feedback, and integration mattered as much as peak power. For those buyers, it offered a level of refinement and performance the major manufacturers weren't providing yet. Most of these bikes were terrible to own. They pushed boundaries, but they weren't exactly practical daily rides. That's the trade-off with being first. You get the innovation and the bragging rights, but someone else gets the refined version that actually works when you need it to. If you want bikes that won't leave you stranded or drain your wallet on maintenance, we just put together a list of the 18 most reliable motorcycles in the world. Real dependability, proven over years, not experimental tech that breaks in interesting ways. Check that out next, and I'll see you in the next video.